Hi guys, thank you very much for tuning in to another video of Lepto Refurbs by Wynand Small, which is me. Flow joke. All jokes aside, I have yet to talk about the sort of the technical details going forward into my next video, which will be the actual official build video based off of the announcement that I had with this previous video prior to this one. What I'm planning on doing and why I'm doing what I'm doing. So I don't know, sorry about the sound quality right now, but as you can hear, the fans is actually ramping up in this PC right now. I'm basically just running a basic benchmark. This is a very well-known benchmark called Heaven. What it's actually just doing, it's enough to put a load on the GPU of the system. Not so much on the CPU, obviously. Mostly this is a benchmark that mostly puts load on the GPU. This is a DirectX 11 benchmark. Quite old. I think it's just what this is about 13 years old. Was coded in 2009 back then. I think the latest release is in 2009. But anyway, besides that, the point of this video is to just show you the reason why I'm moving on to a new case. I've obviously, I've opted to upgrade a few parts here and there to make the experience as optimal as I can, to suck out all the performance I can out of the two main components of the system, which is the CPU and the GPU. Now, the CPU is a 10900K i9 Intel core, basically sort of the top tier card, or I'm sorry, the top tier CPU of the 10th gen series. So it's obviously 3 generations old, but this system will long outlive the latest technology that came out today. By the time it really starts bottlenecking, it will be about 5, speculating on going on 6, if not more years before this component starts bottlenecking. There is, based off of official benchmarks, already bottlenecks in terms of CPU bottlenecking. If you combine that with a very high tier graphics card, well, combining it with a 4090 or a 4080 that came out now recently, will still give you overkill performance, but you will definitely start seeing CPU bottlenecking, where, if you're not familiar with it, it's just that, it's where the GPU, as it's processing tasks and getting a load on, it just waits on the CPU more or longer. It's a lot of more latency involved in order to process tasks, where tasks are handed off to the GPU, so that the GPU waits longer for those tasks to sort of arrive, based off of the CPU tier. Now, obviously, as I've said, it's a 10900K. It's more than capable to do the job. But now I've got a 120mm all-in-one cooler on the CPU, which is doing a good enough job, but not good enough, where you really trying to stretch the performance. Whereas I've mentioned with my previous video, there's a lot of performance laying on the table right now. And this is a very demanding CPU itself. I mean, I've got the TDP, which is the total draw power of the CPU, which is sitting at like 230 watts under extreme load. I mean, that's not even overclocking it. That's just base stock wattage of the CPU itself, and that's, yeah, basically that, it reaches temperatures of like 95 degrees Celsius on, I would say, normal loads. If you say play games, or stretch it out on maybe tasks such as Adobe Premiere, depending on whether or not you are handing off to the CPU or the GPU when you render your videos, and yeah, just that kind of thing. But putting it on a load such as Cinebench R23, Cinebench is designed as a software that's designed to put the most extreme load on a CPU, to see basically where the limit lies in terms of thermal throttling, how far it can push the clock speeds before it starts, I would say, taking a notch down in terms of its boost clocks, because especially with this motherboard, this is a HP Omen OEM motherboard. It's not really designed for overclocking, I would say, but you get a decent amount of the performance out of it. But to put a 10900K on a board such as this, combining it with an RTX 3080, with the amount of cooling that this case has to provide, it's just asking too much of these components to even uphold those boost clocks. So basically, as you can see, let me just switch cameras for a moment. Yeah, so basically if you can see, there's one intake fan, and then obviously the AIO cooler itself is an exhaust fan along with a 100mm companion exhaust fan. And I actually, when I bought this PC, I had to opt to modify a few things here and there, ever so slightly, very minor. As you can see, there's another 120mm fan right there. Sorry for my reflection over there. And then there's basically that just serves as a cooling fan. It's neither accepting air or exhausting it. So basically it's just a fan there to provide an extra layer of cooling towards the components of the system, especially the RAM, because the RAM on its own serves as passive cooling, where obviously it depends on its own heat sinks mounted onto it. And then right at the bottom, if you can see, there is also a 120mm fan that serves as a intake fan as well. Just to assist the one in the front over here, because it didn't come with a fan at the bottom like that. So I actually just had to utilize a splitter. As you can see, it's mounted right there, and then another one actually right at the bottom over there. You can't really see it in the friction, but if you see that little blue LED that's shining up, that's the splitter itself. Reason for that is obviously the motherboard, as I've mentioned, is a bit of a problem providing extra ports on it. So it's quite limited. It's an OEM HP based, I would say, I wouldn't call it a no-name. It is a HP design, but it's mostly standardized in its design, since it's an ATX. It's a micro ATX size form factor, and you can easily take all these components and shove it into a new case with better airflow and cooling, providing much better performance across the components. So yeah, that's the reason I'm moving on. But in my own capacity, I opted, as I've said, to upgrade certain components. Basically the majority of the components I decided to upgrade. I'm basically just taking my CPU along with the storage, and then basically this system will serve as a testing rig, possibly a secondary system for me in this regard. But yeah, so yeah, that's it. Pretty much the reason why I'm doing this, as you can see, I want to now show you doing a few tests over here. I would have wanted to do like some kind of capture screen where I can actually just have you see what I see, but I'm going to use my camera for now. As you can see, we've got a decent amount of performance running there. We've got the GPU that's running at about 100%, say 98, 99. The heat output is binning around, say, 1830 megahertz on the clock. It fluctuates here and there, now and again boosts up. We have GPU boost in effect right now. What that simply means is that the base clock for a RTX 3080 sits around 1.4, with the boost being about 1.7 gigahertz. That's now 1700 megahertz. Give or take a bin or two. And as you can see, it's well over 1.7 by now. It's 1.8, say 45. That is where GPU boost is in fact. GPU boost effectively describes the matter as if the card is under its temperature limit and its power limit right now, as its TDP is actually around about it's a 320 watt TDP card, so it's well under its power limit still, so it will boost to a higher clock speed. So basically that draws a lot more performance on the table, giving you a lot more frames per second. And in this case, you can actually see the CPU is sitting at around 62. It fluctuates between 66 to 60 degrees Celsius, and it's not even doing anything. It's just sitting at sort of an idle speed, really. It's maintaining its clock speed in terms of, say, a slight boost on it, 4.8, almost 4.9. Keeping in mind though that this is a CPU that is boosted up until 5.1 on its if you overclock it, it's already overclocked if you run it at 4 or 5.1, but it's a CPU that's designed to go to a solid 5 gigahertz on stock, and that's with raw performance. And as you can see, it's not doing much. But I mean, 35 say watts, 36 watts, as you can see, 37 the fluctuator, but there with 60 to 66 degrees Celsius, that's sort of unacceptable, you know. And I'm not a person that does like to keep performance on the table, especially for what you've paid for, you know. And this is why I will be upgrading to a better case. Now, having a look at the charts here from MSI Afterburner, as you can see, it's been maintaining quite a constant flow of a graph over here and there. You'll take a dip or two or a spike or two, and you know, the system has the potential to become quite unstable if it keeps on with the fact that, you know, you have to depend on only the certain amount of fans that keeps it cool over here, and you know, you don't want to have that kind of instability on, you know, high-end components such as this. That's why it's necessary to go over to a new and better environment for it to cool down. Now, I thoroughly tested this. I've actually, on my new system, I've sort of tested the CPU and the GPU, but that's basically outside of a case, just sort of mounting the motherboard, setting it on a piece of cardboard, and then plugging in the CPU, plugging in the GPU. And I've bought a new 360 millimeter all-in-one CPU cooler, and simply testing it and running the same benchmark and then a few other synthetic benchmarks as well. It ran way cooler. I got a solid 20-degree drop across both components, such as the CPU and the GPU. Because right now you have to keep in mind though, when ambient temperatures goes up, you know, you've got your ambient temperature, which is room temperature. The components goes up along with it, but now you've got your CPU, especially the GPU, running a much higher temperature right there. It's automatically gonna up the temperatures of the rest of the components. So if the GPU goes up with 10 degrees, the environmental temperature in the case itself will also go up, and that puts a lot of strain on the other components as well. Okay, so what I'm going to do right now, I'm going to stop this benchmark, and I have to just apologize before, and I only realized now that I've been recording this last few minutes as a portrait 9:16 ratio rather than a 16:9 ratio, which is quite a bummer, so sorry about that. But right now I just want to open up Cinebench. I just want to basically show you guys what I mean when the CPU thermal throttles heavily. And also with the low amount of fans that's sitting in the system over here, you've got only those fans that's trying hell on earth to try and cool these components. So let me just have a look at what's going on over here. Okay, so I don't know what happened there. I somehow typed in Cinebench and it just threw it into a clipboard. That's basic Microsoft glitches over there. But anyway, we've got Cinebench R23 running over here. What I'm going to do is I just want to keep my charts close over here. And I'm going to open up Hardware Monitor. It's going to show us a better overview of the package temperature and clock speeds on the CPU. The Cinebench, as I've said, is based to put a hell of a load on the CPU, sort of pushing it to its limit. It will sort of bring it down to its knees. But you know, with Intel CPUs these days, especially it depends on the motherboard as well, with its BIOS or its UEFI version that's loaded onto it. That will depend on how long the CPU will stay in a boost state. So I've sort of timed it here and there between 20 to 25 seconds before it decides, oh, okay, hell, I'm going way too hot now, I can't get enough cooling, let's thermal throttle down. So that's just a safety mechanism to keep the CPU safe in the event of it overheating too much. So basically what it's doing, you've got thermal boost, I think it's thermal velocity boost, I'm not too quite sure between AMD and Intel, what the terminology is right there. But what it's going to do if I start this process right now, it's going to boost to its highest clock speed for a certain amount of seconds before it will thermal throttle down. So if it gets to a point where it's saying, oh, okay, I'm cool enough to run and maintain my clock speeds, it will boost further. But as I've said, with the design of this case and the low amount of fans in this thing, it's going to definitely thermal throttle, and it's going to kick those clock speeds down. Right now you can see it's sitting idle at 4.9, around about. Some of the strongest core that's still kicking up to like 5 gigahertz. So now let's start this. I'm going to throw this aside. We can keep an eye on that, and then we're going to also just open up the I'm going to split up the temperature on each of the cores over there. So we've got the temperature on each of the cores along with the package temperature. Right now you can see it's dipping down to like 45 to about up to almost 60 degrees Celsius, which is crazy, which is honestly crazy. And this is in idle, so there's not even a load on the CPU yet. So yeah, so basically we can see the utilization is sitting at 1.5%, which is even more crazier. There's not much going on now. So right now I'm going to start it. I'm going to run a multi-core test, and basically the moment I touch it, you'll see the temperatures will start shooting up. There we go. We've got it almost immediately hitting 100 degrees Celsius. The package temperature is now sitting at 97. It's going to start, as you start the test, the boost clocks, yeah, you can see it's not doing much. It should have been well over 5 gigahertz by now. You can see the max it hit about was like 5 megahertz, but that was during idle. This is not even during the load process. And I can't even hear myself talking right now because you can hear the fans are going crazy. Especially that top fan, which is the all-in-one cooler. It's sitting on the top over there. Can you imagine the load and the amount of responsibility that all-in-one cooler is supposed to maintain to keep that CPU cool? And this is on a 10900K, one of the hottest CPUs of all time, aside from the fact that the 12th gen that came out recently, just before the 13th gen, was sort of the new hot CPU. 12th gen and 13th gen is sort of determined as the new 90 degree normal temperature CPUs these days. Right now, there we go. You can see the fans kick down. We are effectively thermal throttling. The test is still running, as you can see. It hasn't slowed down much, but I mean, we've sort of lost our clocks completely. It's dipping below 4 gigahertz. And as you can see, the CPU is still 100% utilized. The package power is sitting around 124. You can see it's been maxed out to 223 around. It's not even reached its TDP rated wattage, but it's thermal throttling heavily. It's decided it can't handle that load. You can see the temperatures has dipped down. With the test running, it's sort of running around, say, 75 degrees Celsius. If we look at MSI afterburners charts over here, we go to the CPU graph. You can see right there, we've maintained, that's basically where it maintained a boost status. And that's what I said, it ran it for about a certain amount of seconds. This ran it for about, it started around, say, around 56, and then it ran quite longer than I expected. Around 40 seconds, it decided to hell with it. We're going to dip down to around, what was the wattage? It came from 213 odd, 216 watts down to almost half, not really half, but like 60-70% of the power got lost over there. It dipped down the clock speed, it dipped down the temperature, obviously, so it couldn't handle that load any longer. Test is still running. And this is all in real time. There's no way that these clock speeds are going to get any higher than this. This is obviously determined by the BIOS of the system, but right now it's just a safety mechanism. It's not in any way going to boost that power up. Obviously we need power to up the clock speeds of the system. So right now it's not doing anything. It's just sitting there, with a full load. It's running at full utilization, but it's thermal throttle. Clocks are not going any higher. And we've sort of lost a whole gig worth of performance on the system in terms of its clock speed. Now, this doesn't mean that the system's going to crash in any way. Right now, it's running quite stable since it's thermal throttled, but it's all that spikes. Basically, you can see if we look at, this is now right there, it's sort of in an idle state. When we started this test, It dipped down to around 4.5, boosted up to about say 4.7 around that time. And then right here is where it started to thermal throttle and it dipped down the clock speeds. It lost its power completely. But what I want to say in this regard is that, the system, you play games. This is now obviously a very, very huge stress test. But now referring to playing games and all that, especially with Cyberpunk these days, it's a very CPU, heavy CPU bound system. And I mean, it pushes the system to its knees. And even then, on this system, I have tested and runs almost like a Cinebench test on that thing, because the clock speed, I mean, the temperatures are on running Cyberpunk, and that's just basic gameplay, will hit around 95 to almost 100 degrees Celsius. So effectively, the same test that we're running now, a game such as Cyberpunk also brings the system to its knees. And yeah, that's basically the main reason I've decided to move on to a better case, better airflow, with more fans, better cooling. And obviously you want to think about the sound as well. So with more fans in the case, you will have less decibels shooting around. It will be much more silent system, and just an overall better experience. So that's pretty much it. What I meant to say was, with more fans, not particularly more silent per se, but if you think about it, it's more cooling headroom at this stage, where if you put in more fans into a system, you gain the proficiency of having a system that has way better cooling than a system such as this with less fans in it. And what I mean by silent, you can actually adjust the fan curve to speed up the fans if the component starts heating up. Keeping that balance between noise level and performance and cooling, for that matter. So with more fans, you can tweak the fans to with a lesser RPM speed, essentially still maintaining I would say the high-end performance out of these components. And like I said, you widen up, you sort of add more headroom to your cooling performance when it comes to a situation like this. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Yeah, so basically still running this test. It's just been staying at around 4 gigahertz, and I mean, in that state it's thermal throttling, but it's still running like 80 degrees Celsius. One would think that's supposed to dip down to run in the 60s if it's thermal throttling, but anyway, that's pretty much the point of this video, is to try and tell you guys the reason why I'm making this move. But the main reason for this, aside from well, there's two main reasons, let's just put it that way, aside from moving on to a new case, is obviously the overall experience of sharing that build with my daughter, essentially my family, because I think we'll have a surprise other guest here and there, also featuring a small helping hand, which is my other daughter, the youngest one. Maybe the wifey will peek into the camera now and again, but it's gonna be a fun experience. I cannot wait to shoot this footage and bring this video out to you guys. It's gonna be an amazing video, so please support me on my YouTube channel. Like this video if you like my content, share it with someone that might be interested in also sharing my work content, and then also subscribe to my channel. That will really help me with my exposure and with my upcoming YouTube channel as well, and it will only just help me in my own capacity to bring more and better content to you guys, such as this, and also such as the next video, because stay tuned for my next video. It's going to be the build, and it's going to be epic. Thank you for tuning in, and hope you guys enjoy your day or your evening, afternoon, whichever you find yourselves in. Thank you so much.